You're listening to the Unwritable Rant podcast with your host and bourbon-soaked storyteller, Juliette Miranda.
Well, hey there, y'all. It's Juliette Miranda, and welcome to episode 254 of the Unwritable Rant podcast. I have a bourbon-soaked story for you today about unsolicited material and a blazing ball of perceived genius. But first, y'all know the drill. I'm going to knock back some bourbon. Cheers. Oh, bourbon. You know who actually has a surprising selection of bourbon? That would be Disney World. It's crazy, but true. A few weeks back, my guy and I took a trip to Disney World, and whenever anyone asks me why I still go to Disney as an adult without children, well, quite honestly, there are 75 answers that I can give, and they range from things like, oh my God, the bourbon, to just how much I love all of the cool rides that they have. However, buried in there just a little bit deeper is my fondness for their insistence that dreams do come true. You'll hear it 1,000 times a day in Disney World. Dreams come true. And in Disney speak, the meaning is pretty obvious. You know, of course you can be a pirate or a superhero or a fucking mermaid. Just come to the theme parks. I have to admit that really does make me happy. And it's not just for me and my not-so-secret longing to be a princess, but for everyone. Because seriously, y'all, in the real world, it's not that easy to make shit happen. Dreams and otherwise. Like being a rock star. Come on, y'all, raise your hands. Who wanted to be a rock star once upon a time? I know you all did. And I'm sure my guy will absolutely shudder to hear me say this, but many years ago, he too wanted to be a rock star. Now, he was fortunate in that he got pretty close. You know, he had a record deal and he toured, but that's kind of where things ended. And my guy ultimately realized that this whole rock and roll dream just wasn't going to happen. He was almost right about that. And I say almost because my guy moved on and made a success of a very different career path. But just last week, and we're talking decades beyond his rock and roll days, my guy was contacted by a record label. Apparently, they're interested in a song that he wrote and performed with his very first band. They're talking maybe remastering and re-releasing it, or hell, even re-recording it. And here's the thing. My guy wants none of that. His thought is kind of, I don't know, been there, done that. Why revisit something that didn't work out the first time around? I get where he's coming from. It's kind of the same reason you should never get back together with an ex. That being said, if MTV were to come knocking on my door today, I don't know if my professional ethics are strong enough for me to tell them to go fuck themselves. Even when I can total recall a moment when one MTV executive in LA, he suggested, and I'm quoting here, I might be reasonably attractive if I fixed my nose. Some dreams are just kind of hard to shake. Still, the last thing in the world I want is to become someone who continues to cram their right foot into a left shoe. Sure, you'll get it in there eventually, but how good is it gonna fit, really? Reality can be a very harsh wake-up call. And I can think of no one more in need of a little chat with reality than a certain musician whom I'm going to call Rash. I don't know why I'm giving him a fake name, really. I mean, it's not like you're ever going to know who he is. But ever since I met him, way back when in Los Angeles, he has been convinced that one day, everybody will know his name. He was one of the very first musicians I met in Los Angeles, which isn't saying a ton, seeing as how Rash made it a point to meet everyone in town. Pretty much every day, he could be found working on one of his preferred streets, either Melrose, Sunset, or Ventura Boulevard. If he wasn't passing out band flyers, then he was hawking his one claim to fame, a song that he had written that wound up on a horror movie soundtrack. Since he couldn't sell the actual soundtrack, he'd pressed about 1 million CDs with 2 songs on them, the one from the soundtrack and a 12-minute extended version of the same song. He'd added the movie art to the cover of the case and sold each CD for about $10 to unsuspecting tourists, who likely believed that they were buying a bootleg copy of the movie and not some shitty song. Rash had set up his shop on Ventura Boulevard the day that I met him, and it had been my intention to ignore him completely. I'd learned pretty quickly that my fresh LA glow made me a prime target for every hustler in the city, either for handouts or porn, and I made it a practice to never make eye contact with anyone. But Rash was nothing if not a tremendous salesman, and he knew exactly how to lure a reluctant dummy like me in. He asked about my hair. He was stationed just past Tower Records on a slow Tuesday morning, and I was on an errand for my then boss, a very angry New York transplant who ran the PR department at a major record label. I did not have time to spare. My boss clocked all of my time out of the office, whether I was using the bathroom or having the oil in his car changed, and he would dock my pay accordingly each pay cycle if I went over a certain number of minutes. So it wasn't hard to brush past Rash's outstretched hand as he tried to thrust a CD into my path. So not interested, buddy. And I was several steps past him when he called out, "Hey, can I ask you a question about your hair?" "Ooh, my hair? Why, yes, fine sir, you can absolutely ask me about my hair." I had recently adopted the Jennifer Aniston Friends hairstyle, and I had been hoping that somebody would notice. Preferably MTV, of course, but Rash was going to have to do. And to his credit, he did indeed ask me about my hair and my favorite shampoo and conditioner combo, which wasn't as weird of a question as it could have been, seeing as how his dark hair was longer than mine would ever be, and in need of some serious hydration. We chatted for a few minutes, and when Rash learned where I worked, he handed over a stack of his CDs to randomly leave around the building. Ever since the movie Airheads had come out, every musician in town had added the phrase unsolicited material to his vocab sheet. Now that they definitively knew they couldn't send their crappy demos to A&R departments directly, they were looking for any way short of terrorism to get their music inside the buildings to be heard in an unsolicited fashion. The less bright musicians, they tried to smuggle their music in Marsha Brady style with food deliveries, while the more crafty ones befriended the PR girls and assistants. They would ply us with booze and sex and then insist we keep their latest tragedy playing at our work desks 8 hours a day. I'll tell you, I knew of no band who got signed this way, but I certainly didn't blame them for trying. In fact, the record label that I worked for was well onto this little scheme, and they considered it a fireable offense for an employee to go out of her way to peddle some shitty strip band. I didn't have the heart to explain this to Rash, not when he seemed so earnest about his music. Instead, we exchanged phone numbers and I took a small stack of CDs with a promise to distribute them accordingly. If his music didn't suck, I figured I could generate a little press for the guy. I knew enough writers who were just as hungry to break the latest sound as the bands were to be discovered. The only problem? Rash sucked. It's hard to explain Rash's music, it really is. It's not that Rash was terrible. It's more that he was so very mediocre that he was excruciating. He sang like a high school girl starring in The Sound of Music, where every note is a production that falls just shy of its target. His guitar work was unnecessarily elaborate and would cut into a song at inopportune times like an annoying neighbor who interrupts bad sex. And as for the music, it was a derivative mashup of Skid Row and Journey. And I knew, even after hearing just those 2 versions of the same song, his other material, it wasn't going to be much better. To hear Rash tell it, though, he was a visionary, a genius star on the verge of worldwide domination with thousands of eager fans. I had to applaud his enthusiasm, if nothing else. And since I was still new in town and, running kind of short on friends, I was happy to drop a few very generic compliments on him when he called me a few days later. "There's just so much raw power in your voice," I said, which he knew and said as much before asking me how long I thought it would be before someone at my record label would reach out to him. The only reason anyone would ever deliberately reach out regarding one of those CDs would be to use it for a drink coaster. Of course, saying that wasn't going to promote any sort of budding friendship between us, so I did my best to deflect by asking if he needed help with a press kit. You have to understand, I really didn't care that his music stunk. Los Angeles was still to me a place where any dream could come true, no matter how absurdly inappropriate it may have been. Rash was just another person, just like me, trying to make it happen. So by offering to make a press kit for him, I had hoped to launch a sort of support system for each other. I just didn't anticipate how boundless and one-sided that support would be. Generally speaking, most musicians I worked with knew very little about the actual music business. And even those who did still lacked the skills to sell themselves. It's a little like trying to create your own resume. I mean, you know what you're good at, but it's still kind of challenging to put it down on paper. Writing a band bio or press release is really not much different, and I had a knack for finding the right words for these guys. Most of the time I enjoyed the writing, because I wanted to help these band guys get heard. Ugh, the fucking Rash. He returned my bio draft, having redlined more content than an editor at Vanity Fair. At first I thought they were factual changes. Admittedly, I had taken some liberties in crafting his background. But no, these were style changes. Obnoxious enough to make me wish I was inclined to crush dreams then as I am now. For example, I had written that Rash's music commanded attention. He changed it to, "Rash's music will hit you where your heart is." Not actually hitting your heart, mind you, just the general vicinity around it. Oh. And he didn't have an arsenal of songs ready for recording. Oh, no. He had a collection of hit-making material. What does that even mean? Because it sure as fuck didn't mean what he thought it did. My commitment to the English language was still earnest enough to make explaining dangling modifiers and misplaced clauses and word choice seem like a reasonable idea. As if Rash would somehow see the grammatical light. Yeah, Rash was too blinded by his own blazing ball of perceived genius to give a fuck. It was his music, damn it, and he knew what was right for it, even if it took 5 fucking rounds of revisions to get it right. That really should have been my cue to walk away. Delusions that run that deep typically override any decency a person may have otherwise. I didn't know that then. Maybe it was my youth, maybe it was my discomfort in a new city, but I didn't ask the questions I would think to ask today, like, the most pressing being, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" Instead, I started sleeping with the guy. Because that made sense. I was such a fucking idiot. At the very least, it relieved me of press kit duty. And our quasi-couple thing helped me learn my way around Hollywood. Rash was more than happy to escort me to openings and shows. He could work the room, spouting off lines from his revised bullshit bio, while I interviewed bands or took notes for reviews. It seemed like a perfectly fine arrangement. So fine, in fact, that it continued for almost a year. Let me be clear. Rash and I were never an official couple. And that was deliberate on my part. I mean, I may have been an idiot, but I wasn't stupid. I knew damn well he'd make a shitty boyfriend, and I already had plenty of those. Rash was always just a friendly escape. A guy I called when I needed a break from everything else. What can I say? He was an easy lay, and I convinced myself that I was getting something out of it, until I actually needed something. My very first job layoff left me floundering and wounded. Until that point, layoffs were a sort of vague concept. Certainly not something that happened to young career girls like me. And God knows they never warned me about layoffs in school. They convinced me that I could work my way to the top and stay there forever. When the upper management at my record label started getting axed off one by one, I felt completely secure in my little bubble. Why would anyone care about me? That was just it, actually. Nobody did care. They didn't need me. I was one of dozens of chicks who was reasonably good at her job. It was never that I didn't fit. I just didn't fit well enough. Now, that perspective has only come with time. Back then, I was destroyed. So I turned to the one person I thought would understand. Rash. Who better to emphasize with the struggle of trying to make a dream come true? Who else would understand what it's like to be knocked down on your way to the fucking middle? Apparently, not Rash. It was around 11 a.m. when I showed up on his doorstep, just a sobbing heap of self-pity and doubt. He listens for a minute or two before cutting me off by saying, "Listen, sweetheart, I really can't relate to anything you're saying since I've always been successful. So, maybe you should just try waiting on tables or something." Waiting on tables? Really, dude? What I should have said in response was, "Maybe you should learn how to write a fucking original song, you hack." But I never got the chance because Rash just plants a hasty kiss on my forehead and tells me he can't stay. He has to head out to the Strip to do business. Then he tells me to get my shit together and suggests, hey, maybe we can hook up later tonight. He closes the door, which I stare at for a good 5 minutes as I try to ingest what has just happened. Over the last 360-something days, about 357 of them had been spent listening to Rash pontificate about his place in the music scene. Like a decent person, I listened. Even when his ramblings were so far-fetched and batshit, I wanted to punch the guy in the face. And now, when I needed him to listen to me, he didn't have it in him. God forbid he missed 30 minutes of FaceTime with the tourists on Sunset. Equal amounts of rage and grief fight to take control of this situation, and both were tempting. I really, really wanted nothing more than to go home and wallow under a fuzzy blanket of depression. But then I caught sight of something on Rash's countertop. It was a stack of unopened mail, with the top envelope marked, "Past due." It caught my eye because it wasn't addressed to Rash. It was addressed to a chick. My first thought was that Rash was living with someone, or maybe he had some random groupie crashing with him. That kind of thing was ridiculously common, and it didn't anger me so much as it did pique my curiosity. Who was she? Was she the reason that he ran out so quickly? In grabbing the envelope, my intent was only to learn her name. I figured it could come in handy one day. But under that envelope was another one, and it was addressed to a different chick. While the first envelope appeared to be a credit card bill, the second one was from the gas company. Right under that was a bill from the cable company. And that, y'all, was addressed to me. Like the others, it was marked past due. So I ripped that sucker right open. I mean, it had my name on it. And I learned that I owe the fucking cable company $400 in back payments and penalties. Oh, y'all. That is exactly when the rage took control. Fuck this guy, fuck his shitty music, and most of all, fuck his delusional dreams of being a rock and roll god. Oh, it was time to crush some dreams. And I knew exactly where to start. His hair. Turns out, back at our first meeting, Rash asking me about my hair wasn't a clever way to lure me into conversation. It was vanity connecting with vanity. The dude was obsessed with his hair, even more so than I am. Once he saw the difference the fancy hair care products I turned him onto made, he couldn't get enough of them. Not that he would buy them for himself, of course. He would siphon giant globs of my shampoo and conditioner into travel bottles every time he came over. And I let it go, never once figuring that he was also stealing my identity. That afternoon, I paid a visit to my favorite beauty supply store. And after a lengthy consultation with the stylist there, I walked away with a fun little chemistry project. First, I poured 30-volume cream developer into a travel-size shampoo bottle. Essentially the strongest formula of peroxide a human scalp can handle without burning off. Then I added a squeeze of actual shampoo for believable lathering action. And to a small conditioner bottle, I added the full contents of Clairol Nice and Easy Ultra Light Blonde. And then I delivered both to Rash that night. They were a thank you, I explained, for being so honest with me earlier. I even added a little bow to his musical prowess for good measure. And then I proceeded to get him so drunk on $2 Chuck wine, there was no chance in hell he would ever get it up for sex. Which meant he was passed out in bed by 10 p.m. All I had to do from there was wait. Rash's morning routine was to be up before me so that he could shower and blow-dry his hair, maintaining his illusion of beauty like some sort of 1950s housewife. I gotta tell you, these rock and roll guys were funny like that. They either spent hours primping and preening, or they just never showered at all. And I really couldn't tell you which was worse. I dressed and braced myself for the inevitable when I heard the water start. It ran for a good 20 minutes, which meant that Rash was doing exactly as I hoped. You see, early on I taught him a little hair trick. To get the best benefits from a conditioner, you have to leave it on for at least 5 minutes. Just slather it in there, throw on a shower cap, and then go about the rest of your cleaning routine. Shave, wash, whatever. Then rinse it out. When he finally turned the water off, I moved toward the front door, just in case I needed to make a quick getaway. A few moments pass in quiet, and I wait, anxious and tense, until I finally hear it. A loud, angry wail, followed by the wet stomping of Rash's feet into the bedroom. I call out to him from the hallway as sweetly as I can, and, well, I don't even try to suppress my laughter when he emerges in the doorway. He is dripping and naked, save for the towel that he is clutching around his waist. His face is crumpled in a delightful blend of terror and anger. And his hair? Well, that was something really special. As the store stylist had explained to me, Rash's hair would be too dark to shed all of its color in a single process. Which was fine by me. I didn't want him to look like his wet dream hero, Sebastian Bach. Instead, between the peroxide and the gel developer, Rash's hair had turned the color of a festering skin lesion. Pussy orange, I like to call it. It was glorious. I mean, he's standing there and his hair is just this brazen, penny-like color. And he's screaming at me about how this will ruin him. And I used that as the perfect moment to produce the stack of mail that I had swiped from his countertop. Oh, you mean like how you're ruining the credit of every groupie this side of sunset, you pathetic sack of shit? His mouth drops open, but I am too far into a terror to let him speak. I lay into the guy about how much his music sucks. And I was just a weak ripoff of bands that no one cares about anymore. Then I say, here's what's going to happen, asshole. I've already canceled your cable account. You've got 1 week to resolve your debt with them, or I'm taking this whole stack of bills and turning you in for fraud. Rash just stammers. Clearly, he has never been confronted like this before. I stare at him, and I'm waiting for something. An explanation, an apology, something. And you know what this guy finally says to me? He says, I thought you were my fan. Yeah, well, buddy, I thought you were my friend. So I guess we were both mistaken. You know, I'd like to be able to say something now like, and I never heard from that jackweed again. But I can't do that. For starters, Rash never did pay that cable bill. And since I couldn't pay it either, it went into collections and consequently ruined my credit. I tried to hold Rash accountable, but no one I talked to is all that willing to believe someone who appeared to be a jilted girlfriend. As for Rash, despite what he might tell you, he has yet to experience any of the glory he believes he so rightfully deserves. He is sadly still foisting his music on the public. He even has a new 5-song CD out, featuring, and wait for this, a remastered version of the hit-making single from that horror movie released in the 90s. And I know this because I am on his goddamn mailing list. It's an old Yahoo account that I keep around for junk mail and unsolicited material, and this certainly qualifies. I check it maybe twice a year, and every time I do, there are at least 30 emails from Rash and his delusions. But you know what really pisses me off? It's not that it took 10 fucking years for that cable company debt to drop off my credit report. Or even that after everything that happened, Rash didn't see any problem with adding me to his mailing list in perpetuity. No. What pisses me off is the fact that to this day, he still uses the same press release and bio that I wrote for him. Shitty grammar and all. Ugh, dick. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Unwritable Rant podcast. If you are just dying to hear more of my crazy bourbon-soaked stories, just go to theunwritablерant.com. You will find every episode of this podcast there and more, including a little button that you can click where you can buy me a drink. You'll be taken to a secure PayPal page where you can make a one-time donation to keep me in booze so that I can keep you in boozy stories. There's also that fun little YouTube channel of mine. Just go to youtube.com/Juliette Miranda. You'll find a show called Bourbon Soaked Live on Monday nights at 7 p.m. where I drink bourbon and hang out with a very cool group of people where we talk about all sorts of great stuff. And coming up, I have a new Bourbon Soaked Life video coming out. We're going to be taking a tour of probably the craziest home here in the French Quarter in New Orleans. It's known as the Museum of Bad Taste. And y'all, you're going to want to see this. We're shooting the video this weekend. I expect it'll be up on the channel within a couple of days after that, so definitely be on the watch. As for me, well, you know what I do. I drink bourbon. I'm going to go have some. Hope y'all have a great week. I will chat with y'all again soon. Cheers.
Go to theunwritablerant.com and sign up to get early access to interviews and new videos. And don't forget to connect with Juliette on Twitter @MorningNeurosis.
Girl, you as pretty as a Sunday morning, standing on the corner at Carondelet. What you say we make our way up to Bourbon, couple hurricanes and a hand grenade, and get blown away. Let the chips fall where they may. If it's all the same, what you say, bon ton, hey, pretty mama, I can smell the gumbo. Sweet as taste of honeysuckle on my lips. Good God Almighty, I can hear the trombone. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this. Come a little closer, honey, let me hold you. Nothing tastes better than a bourbon kiss. You can be the flower on my magnolia. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this.